If you're a lineman in charge of keeping the lights on, Grainger understands that you go to great lengths and sometimes heights to ensure the power is always flowing, which is why you can count on Grainger for professional-grade products and next-day delivery, so you have everything you need to get the job done. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. Joining me today is an award-winning former journalist, a tutor at the Faber Academy, and a best-selling crime novelist. It's Fiona Cummins. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me, Jamie. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. Let's jump right in with the new book. Some of Us Are Liars, which is out 19th of June. Tell us a bit about it.
So this is a very complex and twisty tale, and it's about three sisters who are extremely close. One of them is very famous, is a global superstar, really, and very wealthy. And the others live more ordinary lives, I would suppose. And basically, when Jen Miller, who is the middle sister, when she entrusts her youngest child to the care of her beloved sisters, Winter and Alyssa, she has no idea of the devastating tragedy that is about to unfold and the far-reaching consequences for her family. And the reason that I decided to write about this is because I've always been fascinated by this idea about what would happen to the bonds of a family who are really, really close if something really terrible happened and there was a sense that, you know, one of your family might have been responsible for that. What would it do? Would it strengthen your bond? Would it shatter your family? And that is what this novel explores.
Oh, okay. And that's a cool setup as well. I think it's a really interesting social dynamic to see what a group of siblings, three in this case, how that kind of interaction works when one of them is a celebrity and like the kind of way that affects a relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, in my former life, I was a showbiz journalist, and I've been waiting. This is my 7th book, and I've been waiting for a little while to write about celebrity. And it's not the main focus of the novel by any stretch of the imagination, but, you know, there is an element of insider knowledge, I suppose, that has gone into the writing of this. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I think when anybody within a family becomes very wealthy or very successful, and perhaps other members of the family don't, that's an interesting dynamic at play, isn't there? Is there jealousy? Is there excitement and pride? Is it a combination of all of those things? So that's explored to an extent as well. Yep.
Okay, very cool. And like you said, 7th novel. Does it get easier, harder, a bit of both, the more books you write?
I think that's a really interesting question. What I would say is that every single book that I've written is different. Some books have this kind of gorgeous alchemy about them where they almost write themselves. And then other books are much more difficult. And sometimes that can be because you haven't thought the idea out as carefully as you might have done. People talk about writer's block, for example, and my feeling about that is not so much that you're blocked as a writer, but that the idea that you are working on is not working in the way that you might like. And so when you go back and really explore that and think about what's going wrong or which blind alley you might have gone down, that can sometimes sort of free up writer's block. And the other thing that I would say is that, circumstances, sometimes things happen in your life, personal things, life events that impact on your writing as well. And so every book in a way has a personality of its own and has a different process. But what I do think is that you can struggle with a book, or you can think a book has been wonderful to write, and ultimately the readers can't tell the difference. So I always think that's quite interesting as well.
Yeah. Also, I guess when you're obviously writing a novel, it's sort of an all-encompassing thing. You put so much time into it, so much focus into it. You're so close to it that I think sometimes I've spoken to authors where they've said, like, I wrote this one book and it was so easy and I thought it was going to be amazing, and it didn't do as well as I'd hoped it would. And then there was this other one which was like a nightmare for them to write, and like they really struggled at every step of it, and it did really well when it came out. And like it's hard to tell sometimes when you're so close to something. Absolutely.
I don't think that you can be objective about your own work. I think that's a really difficult thing. What I do think, though, is that you can tell when an idea is particularly commercial, and you can tell when a book is working. I think as an author, that's definitely something that you become more attuned to as your career progresses, or at least that's been my experience. I mean, we're all different. And, there are definite kind of books where I think, right, I need to distill this idea down a bit more. I need to have a little bit more clarity about this. Or, I'll be in a situation, for example, my fourth novel, When I Was 10, that's been a very popular novel with readers. And that book did write itself to some degree. It really did. It just flew out of me, that, and I long to replicate that experience, but not quite yet. I mean, actually, the one I'm working on now, I'm enjoying so much, and that does feel quite similar. But yeah, every book is different, and in a way, every process is different too. Sometimes you write faster. Sometimes it's a slog. It's a chore, and I think it's Stephen King who said, wasn't it, that, the thing about writing is that you have to show up every day. And that's what you do when you're a writer like I am. I'm a full-time writer. I'm very lucky to be in that position at the moment. And so, you treat it like a job. You give it the respect that it deserves. That's what I try to do anyway.
Yeah. And you mentioned writer's block, but writer's block is something that I think can be, when you talk about it with different authors, can be very divisive. People have a different idea of what it is, or whether it is a real thing or not. But I think, just simply making yourself write stuff, it's like you'll eventually get past whatever hurdle you're facing if you just, like you say, sit down and treat it like a 9 to 5 and just get writing.
I've always felt that I don't want to be the type of author who might phone a novel in. I think that every book deserves to be as good as you can make it. Your readers are paying good money to buy your books, and whether that's a 99p ebook or whether it's an £18.99 hardback, it's still people's hard-earned cash that they are forking out to read one of your books, and that deserves to be treated with respect. I would hate the idea that anyone would think that there was lazy writing or lazy plotting. I really do try my very best with each book that I write to make it as good as I possibly can at a given time. But for sure, I mean, I think, life circumstances make a difference. Lockdown, personally, I found that very difficult to write. My lovely dad has been very ill, and he died about 3 weeks ago. And that's been quite difficult to write during that whole period of time. And so I think, you can't but help be influenced by outside events. But sometimes for me, writing is a distraction from the problems in my life, from the difficulties in life, and also I use writing as a way to process, big life events that happen to me. And so I find it very comforting, and not being able to do it would be horrendous. And so that's one of the nice things about being a full-time writer, is that I can sit down at my desk and I can sit here for 2 hours and maybe not write very much, but as long as I write something, I go away feeling better about it all.
Yeah. No, I entirely get that. Do you ever find that sometimes if you are stuck on something, just making yourself write and then writing perhaps the wrong thing sets you on the track to be like, okay, that was not right. But now that I did that, I know exactly how to write it and what I need to write.
Yes, and I can sometimes, agonize over a couple of paragraphs, and I've written them and I know that they're not right, but I'm not quite sure how to fix them. And I think that is an instinct that you come to trust as you become a more experienced writer as well. I always remember my agent saying to me, that if when she reads a manuscript, has a niggle about that manuscript, she has come to learn over the years that if she has that niggle about the manuscript, an editor will have a niggle about that part of the manuscript, and a reader will also have that niggle. So it's definitely worth paying attention to your instincts. And so I try and smooth out those niggles, I suppose, by I might go for a walk, or I might go and do some cooking. And I often find that when my hands are busy but my head is not, that's when knotty plot problems tend to resolve themselves. So you're busy, I might be chopping some mushrooms or something, and then I'll think, that is how I'm going to solve it. It just comes. And I think in a way you have to learn to trust the process. One of the things I find so fascinating about being a writer is that this kind of strange, like your subconscious is working all the time, even if you're not aware of it. And, you'll have an issue with your manuscript, or you'll have a problem with plot or something. And, you've been really struggling to work it out. And then the idea will present itself, and you realize that kind of, somewhere in the back of your brain, you've been puzzling it out over a period of days, say, and then all of a sudden a solution will present itself. And I think that over time, I've learned to come to trust myself that will happen. Okay.
I guess there's a kind of quiet comfort in knowing that you just need to take a break sometimes, but your subconscious is still ticking away. And that's often when you get your breakthrough.
I think so. But that's not to say that we, us writers, can and do make mistakes. We might have written ourselves down a blind alley. We might have not thought the idea through perhaps as clearly as we might have done, or what we haven't done is been able to distill, talking to you about Some of Us Are Liars, and it's basically that premise that I outlined earlier. And, that's a very clear idea. And sometimes if the idea is a little bit vague, or you haven't really managed to drill down into the absolute heart of your story and what it is you're trying to convey, that's also when you can get into a bit of difficulty, I think. So I find it's really important for me at the beginning, when I start to write a book, to make sure that I've really drilled down into the idea and I know exactly what it is I'm trying to say.
Yes. Yeah. I think especially if if the genre or like whatever you're writing is quite driven by the concept, if like the selling point is often like pitched through the concept, obviously you need to really know what that is and be able to talk about it with laser focus. I'd love to dial it back a bit here and talk about your kind of early entry into publishing. So your debut novel Rattle came out in 2017 to an amazing reception. How much had you written prior to Rattle?
Not very much at all, in all honesty. I was a journalist by trade. As soon as I left university, I got my first job on a local newspaper, and I spent some time on local newspapers. I worked for the Lancashire Evening Post, and then I ended up at the Daily Mirror on one of their trainee schemes. So my whole career had been in newspapers, and, I had been writing, a different kind of writing, but, I was a a journalist. And I had dabbled with, I'd always written privately, I suppose, kind of very bad poetry and songs sometimes and short stories. But I'd never weirdly considered writing novels as a career for somebody like me. I just didn't occur to me that people might pay you money to write books. It just wasn't on my radar, even though it seems really strange, even though I studied English at university, even though I was a voracious reader. I just didn't think about it as a career particularly, but I've always loved reading and I'd enjoyed writing. And I ended up spending 12 years on the Daily Mirror as a journalist, half of those on kind of news and features and half of those on showbiz. And by the time, I was sort of 12 years into it, I'd had 2 children and I'd fallen out of love with journalism a little bit. And then there were some personal circumstances. My brother's wife, who just had a baby, was very, very poorly with stage 4 lymphoma, which is a type of blood cancer, and they had a newborn baby. I had a newborn baby, and my oldest child, who was not yet 2, also became very ill. So we had these 2 kind of major life events within a few weeks of each other. And my brother and his family were in hospital on one side of London, and me and my family were in hospital on the other side of London. And it was one of those moments in time where you realise that absolutely nothing is promised. None of us know what tomorrow is going to bring. And I thought, what would I really like to do with my life? I would love to have a go at writing a novel. And I wouldn't really recommend this to anyone as a career move, but in a moment of, high emotion, I just quit my job. At the Daily Mirror, and because I was very focused on wanting to spend time with family, and I didn't really have much of a backup plan. I decided that I was going to go freelance and try and juggle that with my 2 young children. And I happened to be at home one day and the radio was on, and there was an interview with an author called S.J. Watson, who wrote a book called Before I Go to Sleep, which was very big at the time, and it later became a film with Nicole Kidman in it. And he was talking about the Faber Academy, which was a writing school, and I thought, that sounds interesting. And I applied, and I got on there. And Rattle was the book that I started writing on that creative writing course. And I appreciate this isn't necessarily a route for everybody. Creative writing courses are expensive to do. And I did have to think very carefully about whether, we could afford it, given that I'd just left my job. My mum looked after my 2 children while I went up to London, and once a week for 6 months to spend 3 hours doing this writing course. And it was transformative for me because at the end of it, I met my agent, and, within a few months we'd had a lot of interest in the book. So, but that is not everybody's story. And I don't believe that writing courses are, essential in any way to becoming a published author. They can help you. I mean, there's certainly facilitated meetings with agents and editors, that's for sure. But you can, agents are accessible. You can send your manuscripts in. So it's not, it's, the industry, the industry does seem to put a lot of sway, I suppose, on creative writing courses. But it's you can still end up being discovered without having done one 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious. So your agent is Sophie Lambert at C&W. Was that so? Did you finish the course and then submit to agents, or was that one of those end of course kind of packs that went out?
You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/ARTS. Just go to Indeed.com/ARTS right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Oh.
Yeah, so at the time, so Sophie had come along, and I think she'd given a talk to our group at some stage during the 6-month course, and I really liked her. She was very grounded, very wise, and had a really smart editorial eye, and so I really liked her. And then as part of the course, I'm not sure how they do it now, but when I did it, you put a short extract into an anthology that was sent out to several agencies. And then there was a day where you read, I think you had 2 minutes or something to read from your work in progress. And I was extremely nervous. Although I'd been a journalist for a good many years, I didn't know whether I had the, writing chops. I really didn't know whether I could write stories, books, full-length novels. A 90,000 word novel is very different to a 1,500 word feature or something. So yeah. I didn't know whether I could do it. But I remember feeling elated because on the way to that day, and these anthologies had already gone out, I got an email from an agency expressing interest in Rattle, and I thought, oh, it's going to be okay. And so at the end of by the end of that kind of creative writing course and the stuff going out, I'd had interest from about 7 agents.
Wow.
And I hadn't quite finished the book, so I knew that I had to do that, but my mind was quite focused because I knew I had some interest, and so I did that, and I sent out the book to a handful of agents. And I remember really vividly that I knew I had a prospect on my hands, I suppose, because I sent out the first 3 chapters and I got an email back within half an hour from an agent saying, I was just going to glance at this, and then I read it and I could not stop reading it, and please send me the whole book. And
wow.
So that was quite an exciting moment. And then so I did. I sent it out to a few agents, and I was lucky to be invited to meetings and all the rest of it. But I'd felt a real affinity to Sophie, and she hadn't replied, and I was like, what? And anyway, I think in a nutshell, I messaged her and I said, I've had some offers from agents and I just wanted to let you know and give you an opportunity to get back to me if you want. And she came back immediately and said, I'm sorry, I've been on holiday, let me read it. And then she offered me representation. And the ultimate reason that I went with Sophie was because we had a phone call and she said, yeah, it's good, but we can make it better. And I loved that. I loved this idea that, because I've never been precious about my writing at all. I'm always happy to be edited. I'm happy to have input from an editor, from an agent who perhaps has a better handle on the market or a better idea, certainly when I was starting out, of the taste of readers and what people respond to and all sorts of interesting and useful things that I hadn't even thought about. And I loved that she said that. And she said to me, I can be quite gruesome. And by that, she meant she could be quite harsh in her criticisms. But I didn't want it to go out in 2 weeks' time, not being ready and to be turned down by everybody. I wanted to make it the very best that it could be. And so that's what happened. So Sophie and I worked on it for about 6 months, finished it, and it was ready to go. And we sent it out to I think it was about 5 of the biggest publishers, and there had been real excitement. There was, an editor from a big publisher who had been ringing around literary agencies trying to find out who represented me because she'd heard about this book, and it was all very exciting. And then every single one of them turned it down.
Oh no!
And I was heartbroken. But there was a chink of light in that. They all said they loved the writing, but that it couldn't decide whether it was a horror novel or a crime novel. And, the market's changed a bit since then. We've seen many more kind of horror crime mashups and things. But at the time, they were like, the book, you need to decide whether you're going to go the horror route and whether you're going to go the crime route. And, crime being one of the biggest selling genres, it was recommended to me that to do that. So that's what I did. And it was really difficult because I'd had feedback from all of these different editors, and I'd been invited to do what's called a revise and resubmit. So you kind of rework it again. And they all gave me different advice. One person said, make it a police procedural. One said, you need to deepen the psychological thriller aspect of it. Another, had said, you need to bring out this character. And it was all different. And my head was in this huge spin, and I just didn't know what to do. And my agent, Sophie, she said to me, gut instinct has taken you this far, so trust that. And that's a really good bit of advice that I would give to other authors, to people who want to write, because I feel instinct is one of those things when it comes to writing, is one of those rare things that can't be taught, in my opinion. Like, you either have it or you don't. But I do feel that you can develop instinct, and you can do that by reading a lot, by recognizing what works in novels and what doesn't, what speaks to you and what doesn't. And so, having read so many books, it helps hone your own instincts when it comes to writing. And so that's what I did. I cherry picked the bits of advice that I'd been given that I thought would work best for the book, and I worked those in. And then it went out on submission again. And that was one of the most exciting periods of my life. We had auctions in the UK. We had auctions in Germany, huge auction in Germany. Wow. And multiple offers from foreign rights territories and the TV rights sold, and, all of this stuff. And so I think, it's a salutary lesson in that, things don't necessarily always work out in the way that you want them to work out, but you have to be in the game to play it, if you know what I mean. You have to, I could have said, I can't take this, I'm not going to rewrite it, I've already put all of this work into it, I'm just going to leave it. And, if I'd done that, I wouldn't have had a writing career, or I wouldn't have the writing career that I have now. And speak to any author, and they will say to you that publishing is a roller coaster of a ride. The highs are very high and the lows can be quite low. You can be flavor of the month at one moment. You can have a bruised heart another time because a book that you've loved so much hasn't done what you've wanted it to. But if you step away from it, then you have no chance. And so that's one of the things that I think about quite a lot. And just this idea, with authors, with really successful authors as well. Some people do have a very splashy debut and then they go on to have an absolutely stellar career, but that is so rare. And so, the thing that I think about it is that you just keep on keeping on, and you hopefully write the best book that you can every time you write a book, and you keep going, and you're steady and you're building, and each book perhaps sells a bit more than the next book. And lots of authors, big authors that we know now, don't break out to their 8th book, their 10th book, sometimes their 20th book, and it's having faith in yourself. I think that's key.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like when people say it took 5 years to become an overnight success, it's like never truer than in publishing.
No, absolutely. And I think, because I think, everybody's route, everybody's journey is different. And, if you compare yourself to other writers, that way madness lies. So it's about looking at your own trajectory. And, I remember Sophie saying to me, do you want to, have this kind of big splashy debut and then no one, you never write anything else again? Or do you want to still be here in 10 years time, in 20 years time? And, my idea of success, the definition of success, has changed a great deal, I think, since I started. Of course, you know, all of us would love to have the red carpet premiere and, you know, the £500,000 advance and, you know, bestseller lists and baubles and awards and accolades and all of that sort of stuff. But actually, the simplest thing for me is earning enough money from my writing to keep on doing it. And I recognize that that is an enormously privileged position to be in. Writing is my job. It has to pay me enough as a job. I can't afford not to work. And so I want to give it my all, like I would any job, and try and do the very best I can. And sometimes, you know, and publishing, this is particularly true of publishing, that success can take, you know, much longer than in other industries. And it's one of those weird industries, isn't it, where, you know, I mean, I think this is definitely changing, but people, publishers often worship at the altar of the debut. And I've always found it quite interesting that, you know, there'll be a lot of money lavished on debut writers who actually haven't really got a proven track record. And then you'll look at, say, a mid-list author who might have done 6 or 8 books and they've been doing pretty well, maybe not kind of stellar, but, you know, they've been doing just fine. And actually, you know, there's an argument that they should be much more rewarded for their ability to write a book a year, to be consistent, to meet their deadlines and to keep on growing than, you know, somebody who's untested. I think it's really, really interesting. But I do think that is changing a bit in publishing. So to watch the space, I guess.
Yeah, I actually had a similar discussion with some friends of mine who are authors the other day. And we sort of thought, could there exist a system where there is just a set rate for all debuts? There's no like super big 6-figure debut deal, but there is also no sort of like really low one, which is also another big issue with trying to break into this industry. If there was just a set rate and everyone understood that if you were a debut, this was what your advance was.
Yeah, and being paid fairly, because it's, you know, horrible as it is, that you know that if you're having been in the industry for a little while, you know that if a book advance is not particularly high, you know that there isn't really going to be that much of a marketing spend. You know, publishers perhaps hope that a book will take on a life of its own. And I mean, some of the things that we've talked about amongst my writing contemporaries and friends is this idea of transparency about payment, because, you know, I personally, I feel that there is a discrepancy between sometimes male and female authors, and it would be nice to have a bit of transparency. There is transparency in lots of other industries about pay scales and things like that. And, you know, it's definitely an interesting idea to explore. However, it's quite difficult to quantify, I think, because, you know, you might think, well, I sell a similar number of books as this author and therefore I should be paid the same, but they might just have submitted a book that the publishers think, actually, this is going to be the big one. This is going to be the one that has got a lot of commercial appeal and we think it's going to, you know, it's going to explode. And so it's very difficult to quantify payments, I suppose. But I do think it would be interesting to know, to actually have, maybe even done anonymously, but to see roughly what some authors sell and how much they get paid. So you can see where you fit into that pay scale. Because, you know, secrecy in a way about these things is how, you know, discrepancy in pay can continue to survive, I suppose, because we don't talk about money in that way. But it's an interesting one, isn't it? People are private about finances, and I can understand that, but it's definitely something to think about.
Yes, yeah, definitely food for thought. That brings us to the point in the episode where I steal all of your stuff and ship you off to a desert island with nothing but a single book. And in that instance, which book do you hope that it would be?
Well, this is a really good question, because I'm going to go a bit renegade here and say that I would like to take a book that I never read before. And I think this is because I get bored very easily. And I was thinking about this and I thought that given its popularity, I might take the first in the Game of Thrones series, because I think it'll be really chunky. So there'll be lots to read, and I haven't read it before. I don't want to read a book that I've read before. I want to take something new. I don't want to be bored. I want to while away the hours, because I don't know how long it will be until I manage to swim to safety or get rescued, or maybe that won't happen at all. And then I can, if it's really bad and I don't enjoy it at all, at least I can set fire to it. And it might last a bit longer than a slim volume of fiction.
That's true. They are chunky, those Song of Ice and Fire books.
Is that a really bad choice? I haven't actually read them.
They're good. They're very good. And I think they're accessible for people who aren't particularly they're like more accessible than other fantasy, if that makes sense. Because they're much more grounded. They're much more sort of medieval history in some ways, with fantasy elements that bleed into them.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna stand by my choice, and then if I read it over the summer, and I might live to regret it, but we'll see.
Well, your problem then is if you read it and you love it, you then have to read all of the next ones, and then you have to wait. It's been 14 years since people have been waiting for the new one to come out, and then there's another one. There's another one coming after that, so who knows how long you're going to be waiting to finish that series.
Well, the thing is, I might be on the desert island for a very long time.
That's true.
So it might not matter.
Yeah, just swap them out.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a great choice. I like that. Very brave. But I appreciate that.
Do people always choose books they've read before?
No, people do sometimes take books that they haven't read, but they're usually books that, I mean, like you, it's a book that they've thought about reading, that they've been like, no, I just need to find the time to read this book, and I haven't read it yet.
I bet it's more literary and highbrow than me, though, isn't it?
No, some people, yes. Some people bring wacky choices. One of my friends decided to bring the Argos catalogue. I mean, I like looking at catalogues, but that wouldn't sustain you. That would last for about an hour. Come on. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of people bring Jane Austen. Yeah, there's a good mix. There's a nice diverse mix of stuff that people have decided to bring, which is cool.
What about survivalist handbooks?
Yeah. We have a few of those. Yeah. If there's I imagine that there's like one of those little like post office, like postbox libraries kind of there, and I imagine all the books from previous guests have put them all there. So you'd find a bunch of like how to build a raft and how to survive in the outside.
And thinking about your friend who chose the Argos catalogue, when I talked about it earlier, when I was freelancing, one of the jobs that I did was actually to make some money was to write the Lidl catalogue.
Oh wow!
So I would write the Christmas edition and the Easter edition. So if I ever do that kind of work again, I'll be sure to pay particular attention to my writing, given that it might be read by someone on a desert island.
Amazing, perfect. We're about halfway. So next up, I have got some questions about writing process, about teaching, and crime as a genre, both in its creation and where it's currently sitting in the industry. That will all be available in the extended episode on patreon.com/rightandwrong.
You know, people that do terrible things, really terrible things, often have people that they love and things that they care about. And so it's kind of exploring this whole, the whole complexity of the human condition, I think. Yes,
absolutely. And that's a huge reason why we love to read about other people's experiences. We love to sort of try and empathize with people that we just don't understand.
Why we love to read, and particularly why we love to read crime, I think, because crime is one of the genres that does that so brilliantly.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, that brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Fiona, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your writing and your kind of publishing journey, and the new book, Some of Us Are Liars, which is out 19th of June, which will probably mean that most of the people listening to this, it will be out by the time this episode comes out. But yeah, thank you so much, Fiona. It's been amazing chatting with you.
And thank you for having me.
And for anyone wanting to keep up with what Fiona is doing, you can find her on Twitter at Fiona Ann Cummins, or on Instagram at Fiona Cummins Author. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe, join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes, and check out my other podcasts, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again, Fiona, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.
If you work as a manufacturing facilities engineer, installing a new piece of equipment can be as complex as the machinery itself. From prep work to alignment and testing, it's your team's job to put it all together. That's why it's good to have Grainger on your side. With industrial-grade products and next-day delivery, Grainger helps ensure you have everything you need close at hand through every step of the installation. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.